They would have burned his books if they'd read the footnotes. Schopenhauer knew this. That's why he buried his most volatile insights not in headlines, but in the margins. In the footnotes, the essays no one quotes, the fragments no one teaches. Because the truth he saw about women was not meant to be heard, it was meant to be buried, silenced, forgotten. But what if the silence was intentional? What if the world needed it that way? What if what we call respect is often a disguise, not for love, but for fear? You were taught that woman is the nurturer, the gentler sex, that her morality is instinctive, her empathy infinite, her soul a sanctuary. But Schopenhauer saw behind the veil. He looked beyond the persona society demanded, and into the biological machinery of instinct. And what he saw disturbed even him. He wrote of the will, that blind, relentless force that governs all life. And in woman, he saw a vessel of that. Will more primal than man, not evil, but indifferent. Nature's instrument designed not to reason but to select, to seduce, to replicate. Does that sound romantic to you? Because for Schopenhauer, love was not poetry. It was Darwin before Darwin. A strategy, not a sentiment. And woman in this strategy was the chooser, not of virtue, but of viability. Her desire, he argued, was not for the good man, but the useful one, the strong, the admired, the one whose offspring might thrive. So where does that leave you? If you were ever discarded not for being cruel but for being kind, not for being weak, but for being emotionally open, maybe the will rejected you, and maybe she was just its messenger. This is not hatred. This is not misogyny. This is Schopenhauer, naked, uncomfortable, unfiltered. And we've only begun to open the box he tried to seal shut. What if innocence is not a trait, but a tactic? Schopenhauer did not believe in moral myths. He believed in forces, drives, compulsions that wear masks to survive in a world obsessed with appearances. And the most effective mask, he argued, was not strength, but weakness. Not dominance, but vulnerability. Why? Because what appears harmless is never questioned. Woman, in his view, mastered this illusion, not consciously, not as a scheme, but as a product of nature's will to reproduce at all costs. She does not need to conquer by force when she can conquer by impression. Her power is not in her hands, but in her ability to shape the perceptions of others. Innocence is not a mirror of her soul. It is the veil that hides the depth of her instincts. Schopenhauer saw how men, blinded by the myth of the pure woman, surrendered logic, dignity, and even self-preservation. Not because they were weak, but because they were programmed. Nature, he wrote, does not care for your enlightenment. It only cares that the game continues. And woman, biologically speaking, was the gatekeeper of that continuation. But here's the question. When you loved her, were you loving her, or the mask she was conditioned to wear? How many men have fallen not because they were deceived, but because they needed the illusion? Because to see woman not as angel, but as agent of the will, indifferent, selective, calculating, is to dismantle a part of yourself that worships her. A part that must believe she is different, that she is purer, that she is somehow above the cold mechanics of biology. But what if she's not? What if you've spent your life protecting an archetype that never truly existed? The mask is cracking, and behind it something ancient is watching. She never had to be cruel. Nature did it for her. Schopenhauer wrote of woman not as an individual, but as a manifestation of the species' deepest survival impulse, a force that selects, discards, and favors without conscience. And yet, we still speak of her rejection as emotional, as if it were personal, as if she meant to hurt you. But what if she didn't? What if it was never about you? Schopenhauer saw that the female psyche is not driven by justice, loyalty, or even fairness, but by utility. Cold, reproductive utility. The moment you cease to be advantageous, emotionally, genetically, socially, the mask of affection falls, not out of malice but out of necessity. The will has no room for sentiment, and this is why her kindness can turn to ice without explanation. This is why she can walk away without closure, without guilt, without a glance back at the wreckage, because at the level of the will, you no longer mattered. The role you played in her narrative was fulfilled, or replaced. And isn't that the most unbearable truth? That you were not betrayed. You were deemed obsolete. It is not hatred, it is instinct. The same instinct that chose the strongest mate in a tribe, the wealthiest suitor in a ballroom, the most followed profile on a screen. Evolution does not consult your feelings. And yet men continue to kneel, not before the woman herself, but before the illusion that she represents something sacred, something pure, something above all this. But Schopenhauer reminds us, nature is not moral. It is efficient. And woman, shaped by that force, does not need to be evil to be ruthless. She simply is what the will made her to be. And no amount of love will change that. Still think it was just about you? Or are you ready to see the pattern? They told you love was a contract between equals. They lied. Schopenhauer didn't believe in the fairy tale of mutual romance. He believed in asymmetry, in hidden motives dressed as affection. To him, what we call love is often a tragic misunderstanding. Man seeks meaning. Woman seeks advantage. One projects, the other selects. And between these mismatched impulses, something we call a relationship begins. But is it real? He wrote that a man falls in love with the idea of being loved. He wants to be chosen not just physically but spiritually, for his depth, his intentions, his heart. Meanwhile, woman, driven by nature's indifference, doesn't care for these illusions. Her selection process is cold-blooded, pragmatic, subconscious perhaps, but no less ruthless. Do you really think she loved your soul, or did she love what your presence promised? Security, status, strength, reputation, genetics, convenience. These are not insults, they are mechanisms. And to Schopenhauer, love was simply the velvet rope placed over them, the perfume that hides the stench of survival strategy. Still think love is sacred? Then ask yourself, why is it always the man who bleeds when it ends? Why is it he who writes poems in the dark while she forgets his name before the next season? Because he believed, and she acted. This is not to say she deceived. No, that would imply consciousness. But the will, through her, deceives all the same. It promises connection and delivers transaction, whispers soulmates and delivers selection. You didn't fall in love. You fell into a machine. And once your function expired, so did the illusion. But now that the veil has been lifted, will you still call it love? The deeper we go, the harder it becomes to return. She said she loved you, but devotion has always had a price. Schopenhauer didn't trust displays of affection, not because he believed women were liars, but because he believed nature was. And nature, in his philosophy, has one objective: continuation of the species. Every emotion, every bond, every tear-soaked promise is secondary, decorative, functional. So what is devotion really? It is not selflessness, it is investment. It is the calculated surrender of power in exchange for greater power later. The appearance of submission is often just the prelude to control. A woman's devotion, Schopenhauer would argue, is not a gift. It's a negotiation. Unspoken, yes, but binding nonetheless. Have you ever noticed how devotion often fades when security is lost? The moment a man loses status, income, direction, her gaze changes. Not necessarily out of cruelty, but because the terms have changed. What she gave was contingent. Her love was never unconditional. It was positional. And this is the truth men are trained never to see. You were told that if you just loved harder, stayed more loyal, gave more of yourself, she would stay. But Schopenhauer would scoff. He'd say, "You mistake instinct for integrity." Devotion, in his view, is as fluid as advantage. When the gain is gone, so is the vow, and yet we romanticize her loyalty. We write songs about it. We build temples to it. Because to question her intentions is to question everything men are taught to fight for, to protect, to provide, to prove. But devotion that collapses under pressure was never love. It was a loan. And now the interest is due. Still think she was yours? Or was she always just with you? Until the winds changed. This is the part of the story no one dares to tell. But we're only halfway through. Why do we forgive her cruelty and crucify his? Schopenhauer saw something modern culture refuses to admit, that moral judgment has never been equal. Woman, wrapped in centuries of myth and sanctity, is rarely held to the same standard. She can betray, manipulate, abandon, and still be framed as the victim. Why? Because society doesn't see her as accountable. It sees her as sacred. From the Virgin Mary to the modern mother, woman has been placed above reproach. Her motives are seen as pure, her emotions as truth, her mistakes as reactions to male failure. And so, when she harms, we search for an excuse, a context, a man to blame. But Schopenhauer would not bend to this illusion. He believed the idea of female moral superiority was a cultural hallucination, a comforting lie, one that hides the raw reality. Woman is not more ethical than man. She is simply perceived as less dangerous, and perception is power. Ask yourself, why is her infidelity a cry for help, but his is evil? Why is her manipulation seen as trauma, but his is labeled abuse? Why is her abandonment self-care, but his is cowardice, because you were trained to see her flaws as wounds, not as weapons? And therein lies her silent advantage, the ability to act without consequence, to wound without guilt, because the world will not believe she intended harm. And in that disbelief she becomes untouchable. Schopenhauer watched this double standard and called it what it was. Not fairness, but favoritism. Not elevation, but indulgence. She is not innocent by nature. She is innocent by decree, a verdict. Written not in truth, but in myth. And the man who dares challenge this myth, he is labeled bitter, misogynist, dangerous, because exposing the imbalance risks unraveling the entire story we've told ourselves about love, gender, and justice. Still, want to believe in her halo? Or are you ready to see the shadow it was hiding? She doesn't need to raise her voice to control you. She just needs to feel. In Schopenhauer's world, power is not always loud. Sometimes it cries. Sometimes it trembles. Sometimes it hides. Behind a quiver in the voice, a tear at the right moment, a carefully timed silence. And nowhere is this power more invisible and more effective than in the subtle weaponization of vulnerability. Because what is more disarming than a woman who appears to need saving? Schopenhauer saw that male instinct is to protect, to step in, to prove worth through sacrifice. This drive, noble on the surface, becomes the very tool of his undoing when met with the feminine display of helplessness, real or performed. But here's the twist. Vulnerability does not always signal weakness. Often it signals strategy, not conscious manipulation. That would be too simple. It's deeper, biological, cultural, learned through generations of survival. A woman learns, even without realizing it, that her emotions shape male behavior, that tears open doors, that silence creates guilt, that a broken voice wields more control than a raised one. And so you respond. You soften, you apologize, you compromise. Not because she asked, but because she didn't have to. This is not a story of evil. It is a story of instinct. Schopenhauer would argue that this dynamic is hardwired, that female vulnerability becomes a currency, traded not for power, but as power. And the man who refuses to respond, he is painted as cold, abusive, dangerous. Meanwhile, her power remains invisible, protected by the very image that grants it. Ask yourself, how many times have you surrendered not to her argument, but to her reaction? How often did you abandon your own truth just to stop making her upset? And who truly held control in those moments? This is not about blame. It is about awakening. Because as long as you believe her softness is harmless, you will never see the hand guiding the game, and the game is far from over. He gave her everything, and she left like it meant nothing. Schopenhauer didn't romanticize suffering, he dissected it, especially the suffering of men who devoted themselves entirely to women, believing that love, loyalty, and sacrifice would secure permanence. But what if permanence was never part of her design? He warned of a brutal truth. In the arithmetic of instinct, men are disposable. You were taught to earn her heart through devotion, to provide, protect, and prioritize. And yet, the more you gave, the less she valued it. Because once your utility is secure, your mystery vanishes. And without mystery, desire decays. Schopenhauer observed that the very traits that make a man loyal, consistency, emotional availability, dependability, are often the same traits that make him forgettable. Predictability is not rewarded. In the economy of the will, it is punished, because she does not crave comfort. She craves selection, and once she feels you have no rivals, no scarcity, no challenge, the subconscious judgment is rendered. He is safe. Therefore, he is replaceable. You were not left because you failed. You were left because you were finished serving her instinctual needs, finished playing the role her unconscious assigned you, and in that moment, her soul did not ache, it recalibrated. This is what modern love rarely admits. Women are not cruel for leaving. They are cold because nature made them that way, because detachment ensures survival, because lingering in expired dynamics weakens the chance to upgrade. You see heartbreak, she sees optimization. Still believe love is enough, or do you now see the ledger behind the longing, the silent cost of giving everything to someone who was designed to leave once it no longer served her will? The illusion is collapsing. Are you strong enough to walk through the ruins? She didn't say goodbye. She disappeared. Schopenhauer would not have been surprised. To him, the quiet vanishing act, the sudden shift from intimacy to indifference, was not cruelty, it was efficiency. Why explain what no longer serves you? Why offer closure when nature has already closed the door? This is the silence every man fears. Not the screaming, not the accusations, but the absence. The vacuum where love once echoed, because silence in its cold finality speaks a truth no words dare confess. You were not essential. And the worst part? She has already moved on. Emotionally, psychologically, sometimes even physically, long before you noticed. While you were still giving, still fighting, still hoping, she had already left, step by silent step. She simply waited for the right moment to vanish, because confrontation implies obligation, and obligation is a weight she was never taught to carry. Schopenhauer saw that in the woman's psyche, the will does not waste energy on post-mortems. Once a man's utility expires, his presence becomes noise, and noise must be removed. Quietly, cleanly, without guilt. And so she rewrites the story, not with facts, but with feelings. Now you were too clingy. Too weak, too unavailable, too much, too little. The narrative shifts not to describe what happened, but to justify the shift, to cleanse her conscience if she even needs to. Meanwhile, you're left holding the ashes of a fire she no longer remembers, still wondering what you did wrong, still praying for a response that will never come, still believing that closure is a right. But in Schopenhauer's world, it is not a right, it is a luxury. One the discarded are rarely granted, because when the will is done with you, it leaves no trace. You are not a villain. You are not even a memory. You are simply nothing now. One more chapter remains. Now you see her, not the illusion, the force. Schopenhauer never wanted to destroy woman. He wanted to destroy the delusion, the spell cast by instinct, culture, and longing that turns her into a goddess, a savior, a cure for male suffering. But she is none of these. She is human, flesh, imperfect, and above all, a vessel of the will, And now that the mask is shattered, what remains? Freedom. Not the freedom to hate, but the freedom to see. To finally reclaim your gaze. To stop kneeling before a myth and start walking as a man stripped of fantasy. Because when you stop demanding from her what she was never designed to give, the pain begins to die. She cannot complete you. She was never meant to. Her instincts are not evil. They are just not about you. They are about the species, about survival, about advantage. You were not chosen for your soul. You were chosen for what your presence signaled. And once that signal dimmed, so did her devotion. Schopenhauer teaches us this: to love a woman while understanding her nature is not bitterness. It is balance. To see her power without bowing to it. To feel her beauty without being conquered by it. You are not her savior. You are not her project. You are not her redemption arc. You are a man. And now, perhaps for the first time, a conscious one. The suffering was not punishment. It was revelation. Every abandonment, every silence, every cold goodbye was the will tearing the blindfold from your eyes. So ask yourself, will you keep chasing shadows? Or will you finally step into the dark and own it? Because that is where freedom lives. In the darkness you once feared, and now understand. Your liberation does not come from her love. It comes from no longer needing it. This is the truth. Schopenhauer buried in footnotes, and now it is yours. Are your eyes open now, or do you still wish to go back to sleep?